everybody, and welcome back to the Hilltop Pillbox here in Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada. And we're ready for a solo venture again of our 1914 game. Now, we're going to be running with the new and seems to be quite popular version that has Italy being neutral at the beginning, which means they can only move within their own borders. They can transport these fellows across if they want, that's fine. But they cannot be attacked, nor can they attack during round one. But they also only make $7 because they're not on a war footing yet. So I thought that would balance it out instead of giving them a full build, giving them a half build. So we'll see how that goes. It went pretty well last game. And if you hear the music, yes, it's from, I think, The Great Escape. But I know that's a different war. But it's hard to find good World War I music. Anyway, that war wasn't looked on as fondly as World War II, I guess, as being a noble struggle. So, not a lot of movies about it. The other thing we're going to do is we are going to implement the trench battle map. This is just my little invention. I put it up in the last video that I had on this, and I got some excellent thoughts back and forth. And so we've made some changes. Instead of costing IPCs, because as I kind of play tested it a bit more by myself, I realized that France would likely drain its own resources to hopefully inflict some casualties, and if the battle goes poorly, Paris could be wide open. So, for those of you not familiar, the trench battle map here is a hex battle map that gets populated with units and markers. And as it stands right now, the two territories that these really are in are Picardy and Burgundy, but part of me wants to move it to Belgium and Lorraine, but Belgium has nothing in it. So I think we're going to stick with Picardy and Burgundy. And when I initially did this, I had Picardy, Lorraine, and Burgundy. So that's still something I'm working on. I'll take your thoughts on that. But essentially what this does is it takes away from the static war, and what happens is you populate the board with all the units that are coming in, all the units that are there, and then you actually do a battle till the end. And at which point the French could retreat, or the Germans could retreat, or whoever's in there can retreat, and the other person actually takes it outright. It's not a contested territory, and there's multiple rounds of combat. So this is just the little map that I made up. The attacker will come in from this side. The defender will be on this side. They have artillery and infantry, and the aircraft still do their battle like they do on the typical board. You roll the aircraft, and then the surviving aircraft gets a strafing run, and the artillery gets a bonus to their attack. Now in the first one, when I did some play tests, the artillery was just shredding everything. And it just turned out to be a real slaughter. So I limited it to, I think, 2 for the defender and 3 for the attacker, or something like that. Still working with that, but I've decided to let everybody bring everything in and use it as you will. But the difference is the defending artillery has unlimited range. And the attacking artillery has a range that's going to have. They're going to have to only target infantry. Okay, they cannot target the defending artillery. It's a little allowance I did. I know it's not historically accurate because, of course, you'd have artillery duels like crazy, blasting each other with their long-range artillery. But for the game playability, if Germany walks in with 10 artillery and then they just hammer on this thing forever, that's just not going to work. So we're going to have the defender, and it could be the Germans if the French go to attack into there. The defender gets unlimited artillery range, whereas the attacker has unlimited range, but they cannot attack the enemy artillery. Okay. All right, so this is what happens now. Instead of IPCs, we're going to go with points. Some bad shadow there. All right. I'll tell you what, I'll just zoom in. There we go. All right, so Germany has 50 points to spend for the entire game, and I'm looking at, if you take over you know, strict neutrals or something, you might be able to get an extra 5 points or something. I'll toy with that. And then the French would have 35 and the UK would have 15, but they can only use that when they are the only forces present. So sometimes in Belgium or in Picardy you end up with strictly UK forces. Then the UK could use their points. Otherwise it's all French points. So if they're combined, then the French would be paying for that out of their 35. But each side can only use 12 points per battle. Barbed wire is 1, trenches are 2, and gas is 3. Okay. Now, here are the steps that are going to be used. You can hear the march from Bridge on the River Kwai there. So step 1, the attacker declares a battle, including all units to be used, so the defender can now accept or decline battle. But if they decline, they retreat towards the capital. If not possible, the battle occurs. So what we're going to do is I'll show you an instance where that might actually happen. It's unlikely, but let's just say that Germany is in Burgundy, and the British have landed here or here and then punched into Lorraine and were able to cut off the Germans from Berlin. When France goes to attack Burgundy, if Germany can't retreat towards its own capital safely, then the battle will occur. There will not be an option to retreat. Okay? And part of me wants to say if you retreat, then you're going to give up, you know, maybe 5 of your points to the other team, right? So if you just retreat without fighting, you give them some points. Step 3, so the defender populates the board with units, the attacker does the same. Step 4, the attacker declares points to be used, defender does the same. So defender will line everything up, the attacker will line up all of his, and then the attacker has to say how many points. And knowing that the attacker, the only thing he can use is gas, those are 3 points apiece, he could say I'm using 12, and then you know he's using 4 poison gas shells. The defender says 12, well, they could grab 12 barbed wire or 6 trench works or a combination of that. But whether or not you use them, you have to actually put them on the board. So once points have been spent, you are now committed to at least 3 rounds of battle. So you can't have the attacker say, I'm using 12 points, the defender says, I'm not using any, and then when he puts all his stuff on and fires, you just say, I'm retreating, I'm out of here. No. You have to stay for 3 rounds of battle. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. So after the 12 points are done, then the attacker and defender puts their markers on. The gas has the range for the, like I say, it's unlimited except can't attack the defending artillery. So they'll attack, obviously, the infantry behind the trench works. So it doesn't matter when you place or what order, you just place them on. Okay, and this is how the things work. Okay, this is pretty similar to the first video. Okay, so barbed wire. Infantry entering must roll a die. And this is as a group. So if you come in with 20 infantry, you don't have to roll the dice 20 times. Just roll 1 die. You roll a 1, you enter, and the barbed wire is removed. So I'll just grab a German infantry here. Of course, since they shorted us on this game, I'm going to use a 1 from the World War II. So here's some barbed wire that the French have set up. And the German is here, and he goes to move into the barbed wire. He'll roll a die. If he rolls a 1, boom, the barbed wire is cleared, and the German can attack that turn. So that's the roll you want. From a 2 to a 5 means that, yeah, you 2 to a 5, you can come on in, but now you can't attack. Okay, you can't attack from here. And then a roll of 6 means that you were refused entry. So if you roll a 6, you try to go in, you roll a 6, you go back, and you can't attack that turn. So the barbed wire did its job. Okay, barbed wire may be targeted by artillery. It's the same thing if it hits. It can destroy, but then when the artillery is destroying barbed wire, the infantry isn't being destroyed. So I like that part of it. Trench works basically gives defense an extra defense. Defender extra defense. All attacker rolls are +1. So if the infantry are attacking at a 2, then now they need to roll a 1. right, essentially, to get a hit. Okay, so it basically adds 1 to whatever they roll. So if infantry rolls a 2 and they attack at a 2, that's actually a 3, so the attack is ineffectual. Okay. Gas. The attacker designates target zone. Okay, so if the Germans are going to fire some gas, say they're going to fire it here, they roll 1 to 5, no problem. Okay, anything 1 to 5, the gas hits, but it doesn't do anything on the first round. Okay, and if you roll a 6, it's a dud, and there goes $3, gone. Okay, or 3 points, not bucks. On round 2, though, the gas will move in the direction of the wind. So at the beginning of each round of battle, because you don't need to use your gas in the first round, although you likely will, you're going to roll the direction. So after you fire, you roll the direction of the wind. We got a 6, so this gas will move here. Now, the thing that I have chosen to do for this, just because this is more accurate, is that you cannot hurt artillery units with the poison gas. Has to be infantry, all right, but I've made it much simpler. Essentially, you kill half the infantry rounding up, okay? So when you fire this gas, you'll want to fire it into a zone where no matter where it goes, it'll hopefully hurt somebody, okay? Now, part of me is playing with the idea of rolling the wind first because they did know the way the wind was going, but it was interesting how often they said, oh, the wind is blowing this way, so they'd phone up the chain of command, and the chain of command would be busy sipping tea and doing whatever until they got the order to fire, and the wind would have shifted. And now maybe it wouldn't go from, you know, this way to this way, but it might go from this way to this way, right? And so you fire your gas here, hoping to kill guys here, and it goes that way, okay? But it kills half the guys rounded up. Now, that is whether they're in trenches or not, okay? Because for trenches, as we know, the gas was heavier than air. It would actually go into the trenches, which caused guys to come up out of the trenches, and then, of course, these guys have an easier time shooting them, all right? So, there you go. That's everything there. I think that is all I wanted to talk about. There's something else rattling around in my mind right now that might come up the first time I have one of these battles, and I'll let you know. But that's pretty much it. That's everything about the battle map. I tried to make it a little simpler than it was before because some people were afraid it might bog down the game. I don't think it will, this in the way I have it set up now, because we are only going to go with two spaces, Picardy and Burgundy, both right against Paris. So if France retreats, they're there. Germany can come in next round. Unless France is going back here just to collect a bunch of guys and then charge into there on their next turn, right? And counterattack. So the Battle of the Meuse or something. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So I'll be doing my round 1 here shortly, and we'll let you know how it turns out. And of course, as always, if you do have any comments or suggestions, I gladly take them. I think that this trench battle map has some real possibilities to it, and I think it brings in some of the elements that are missing in this game. I still love this game, and I think it's a fantastic game. But I think what it does is it does add a layer of historical accuracy to it that is a little lacking here. That's why we make anything, though, right? That's why YG does his stuff. That's why Sired Blood has done his stuff, and many of you have added different things. I know Jeremy down in Vancouver there, he's working on some new stuff for Global 40, giving Canada. I think if you watched one of my recent videos on that, we played a game, and Canada has an economy, and Germany and Italy get a little bonus because of that, and it worked out great. We lost, but I really love the mechanic of giving Canada its own economy. So, all right, we will get to it right away here, and we'll let you know how round 1 goes of Axis and Allies, 1914. And just a little addition to this, we are playing, we, meaning me, we are playing with the Russian Revolution rule. And the overall tactic I'm going to use this time is similar to what I did with Germany a couple of games ago, and it actually worked out pretty well. Where Germany, this is the opposite of what Germany did in the war, where they fight a holding action. In the real war, they fought a holding action in the east and sent everything west. In this, I'm going to try to staunch the flow here of French and British coming in this way, and I'm going to push what I can into Moscow with the help of the Austro-Hungarians. The other thing we're going to do is we are going to limit India. I know there's a house rule of 5. Some people say 4. We're going to do 5. So England can build 5 things here. No ships still, but they can build anything else there in India. So that'll take some pressure off the Ottomans, because sometimes I'll build everything here. But it will increase pressure on Germany here. So there is a balance to be struck, and we'll find out if it's a good balance or if we need to go back to the drawing board. But that's going to be the overall stratagem here, is block here. Send everything that way. Alright, wish us luck. Alright, here we are with the battle theme from Midway. But, well, there you go. Again, a few years too late for this game, but here we go anyway. Well, we'll start with what happened with Austria-Hungary. Went into Serbia and failed. 1 Serbian remains. But they went into Romania and brought the farm and took no hits. Nothing. So they are very strong here right now. They got about 15 infantry and 4 artillery ready to go in. Galicia got bulked up with everything from Vienna and most of the stuff from Bohemia. A little bit went to Tyrolia, but as we know, we're doing a delaying action here. So this next turn, Austria-Hungary will likely go in here and try to keep the Italians boxed up. We'll see how that goes. Did buy a plane just for that very reason, to hopefully get a few more hits with the scant artillery I brought. The Russians really had no choice but to then retreat to Ukraine, because as you can see, we got 15 here, we got another 14 there. This could be a real problem. I don't think Austria-Hungary's got the wherewithal to kill all that right now, but they might try to inflict as much damage as they can. So when the Russians retreat to Moscow, they're pretty bloodied. Germans came in unopposed, of course, to Poland, as the Russians had to reposition everything. Germans had a little bit of a setback in Denmark. Yes, slowly Denmark. The Germans went in, got no hits, and the Danes replied with 3 hits of their own. So it actually cost an artillery from the Germans, because they have 3 men and 4 artillery in Kiel. Got no hits. Hoping to scoop a couple of bucks for each round of the game, and it's not working out so far. And there's no chance to really have that work out on the next turn either. It's highly unlikely. So to see what happens there for the Germans. And Belgium, they went in, and there might have been 1 loss, but they took that pretty simply. And then, of course, started to build their wall of humanity here. The Parisians, or the French, came here into Picardy and brought some Brits over. Germans did not try to attack the UK fleet, and then the French, as they tend to do, send their battleship north. The Germans did have some success here. Took out the British cruiser and transport. French, of course, take Portugal for the free $2 and a free man and an artillery, which they will use sometime soon. And now we're on to the Battle of Britain. It's good music, though, eh? The Germans, of course, do what they do, and they grab the little bit of money. I don't know why I put a symbol on Cameroon. I was just throwing things out there, but so they're up a few bucks right off the bat, but that, of course, gets whittled away. And let's see here, the Turks. Turks are gonna do a little better this game, I think, judging from this from the outset. The British lost a couple of units here in Persia, and Mesopotamia is pretty packed, and Sevastopol, of course, is easy pickings, as the Russians have problems. They've got 2 major empires coming after them here, so the Allies are going to have to push hard and put some pressure on the Germans to hopefully pull some troops away from the east. And the British will have to do what they can. Only get 5 things here. I only built 4 this round just because of the way the money went. Because up here I built another transport and a sub just to kind of lock up that sea zone. and they can get more stuff across in the turns to come. Brought the transport from 19 down to here to bring it up here to be able to shuttle more things. That's pretty much it. The Italians actually built a plane. They had $7. They saved one and just built a plane because they got a decent stack of artillery there. And they have to answer this one here. Now this one could go to Russia, of course. Russia has no air force. Could not afford it on round one with the impending doom. So we'll see what happens though on round 2 here of 1914. Off to an explosive start already. Alright. Here I am back with my John Williams themes playlist because, hey, it's good music to play games to. Alright, well, we'll start down here because that's where Raiders happened. It was down in this area, I believe. And so, the Ottoman Empire, who's actually pretty flush with cash, finds itself a little bit under the gun here from the British and possibly the Italians. We'll talk about that in a second. So they did go up and take Sevastopol, of course, and Bulgaria. So they got a decent amount of cash flowing in right now. But they've lost Transjordan, and in their attempt to take it back, they actually hadn't lost it. It was contested, but they weren't able to wrest control from the British, who landed a couple of units here in Arabia. So the Ottomans had to respond, and yeah, this here is looking a little bit good for the Ottomans, but the British, once they tool up, that could be a problem. The Ottomans also had to come up here into Russia to help out because the Austro-Hungarians are nowhere to be found. They came smashing into Ukraine, and they got, I believe it was 12 hits on 30 dice or something, just a preposterous number of dice. But they only got 12 hits, and then the Russians, on their response, got 21 hits. So that took the Austro-Hungarians down to, they had 8 artillery and just a couple of men left. It was pretty nasty. And then, of course, the Russians on the counterattack cleaned them out. So now you got a big stack right here of Russians, and Galicia's wide open and Budapest is wide open. So the Germans had to come down and rescue them, snag Belarus along the way. But then there are Russians, you know, they've got a little bit of a response here. So the Eastern Front is not going as planned because the Austro-Hungarians dropped the ball really hard. The Italians have come into Albania and took that. So it's not looking good for Austria-Hungary right now. They've got too many things to fight. Their battle in Venice went horribly. They attacked and got demolished on the Italian counterattack. So they lost their fighter and all their troops that were there. Now Austria-Hungary goes next, so they can kind of probably marshal things up here for a good punch. Because the Italians don't have anything, right? Like, everything's up here. They got 4 men. Italy did buy a second boat, though. The thinking is that a second boat allows to land more reinforcements here, because Austria-Hungary can't really deal with this right now and protect Trieste and protect, what's this one called, Tyrolia. So it's not good. They need Superman to come help them out. But also, the Italians can come across to Smyrna, so Austria-Hungary's got to be aware of that, if not Constantinople itself, although they only have some infantry. But I thought this might add a little bit of intrigue to the game, you know, because if Italy is going to fall, it's going to fall. So there's not a lot you can do about it if Austria-Hungary is a concerted effort. But since Austria-Hungary lost everything here, and are relying on the Ottomans and the Germans, maybe Italy has a chance to kind of fly around here. I'm going to test that out and see how it goes. Over here on the Western Front, the Germans took Lorraine, the British took it back, lost an artillery doing it. The French smashed into the Germans and did some damage. I think they got 12 hits, and the Germans responded with 13 hits on the French. I believe that's what it was. I think they were just 1 hit off each. And the French even had the air power. They only got 4 out of 8 hits with their artillery, so a little disappointing there. But there's more help on the way. Whereas the Germans, they've got help here, and that they might be able to move up, but I'm going to have to see. Of course, they didn't have enough to take the Danes out, so had to position some things and hopefully do that this next round if you're a German fan. The British built a couple of transports and sent these transports over to 8, offloaded 4 units, but they're on their way to Canada. Of course, America just saved its money. No sense building things until round 3, and then you got your... What do you got at the end of round 3? Actually, beginning of round 3 is when you buy, so you'll have $60, and then you'll have another 20 for the next round for start of round 4. But all right, so that's how things are here. Nobody's taken a chance here in the Black Sea yet, and nobody's taken a chance in the Med. Although Austria-Hungary could be getting desperate at this point. This was just devastating for them. I think that might actually spell doom for them, because the Russians can certainly take care of this German contingent, and the Germans have a bit of stuff here, but not enough to beat that. Especially if this comes to Belarus. I mean, Germany's got issues too, right? Like, this is not looking good for the Central Powers after round 2. Hopefully round 3 treats them a little bit better. If we look at Africa, the Germans just brought everybody together and sent one guy out to French Equatorial Africa to grab that. But they're surrounded now on all sides. But with 4 troops, 5, because they'll move him back, of course, they might be able to hold out, because the British can only bring 3 and the French can only bring these ones here. I guess they can bring 6, so we'll see. It'll be interesting, though, to see what transpires on turn 3. This one might be over before it begins. Well, not sure if you can hear the Jaws theme music, but boy, it has been a very interesting round, and right off the bat, things do not look good for the Central Powers. They are down to 1 infantry in Africa. The one bright light is the Ottoman Empire, as it usually is early on. We'll see how well they do here, though, but they were able to kick out the Brits here. The Brits came in and tried to take them out, and they left 1 infantry. So the plane from Constantinople came in, 2 artillery, 2 men came in, wiped out the British, and took 1 loss, I think. So yeah, pretty successful. And now Africa is kind of open to them. The British here decided to bring up their forces before trying to attack Mesopotamia, which is probably a good idea. Up here, the Ottoman have left 1 guy behind in Romania just to kind of hold it, but have their 6 men and artillery in Sevastopol now. So the Russians, although they were able to destroy the Germans in here, now have a small force here. They got this annoying guy here. They've got a single German and then a stack of about 20 Germans or so up here, with about another 12 or 13 coming. So it doesn't look terribly bad for Russia, but they can't go everywhere at once. So it'll be interesting to see what we do with Russia here after Austria-Hungary's turn. Austria-Hungary has definitely been the very, very weakest of all the nations. They're even weaker than Italy as far as things on the board right now. They've been pummeled. So the Italians broke out from Albania and took Serbia, while Austro-Hungarians were more concerned about shoring up their defenses. And the Italians made no sense to go attack one of these stacks. Even if they would have won one of the battles, they would have lost Venice, and then they'd be chasing the bad guys down the boot. And that would have been difficult for them to hold on. So it's a defensive posture for them, but they do have an aircraft to help out their decent stack of artillery. Up on the Western Front, Germany got absolutely beat. It was a dirty beating. First from the French, then from the English. And the Germans gave as good as they got against the French, but did nothing against the English. Even they had 4 artillery left from the first battle with the French, and when the British landed, they got 4 shots and they missed on all 4. It was just dreadful. And then they missed again. So, yeah. Germany's going to have to scramble here pretty quickly. But having to rescue Austria-Hungary really hurt them, because they lost an entire army group down here in Ukraine that they could have used going straight for Moscow. So Germany is going to have to play some catch up here. Now again, Ottoman is pretty secure here, but they're going to have to come and deal with these Italians now because Austria-Hungary might not have the horses to do it. We'll see. We might take a stab at killing some of these guys here, but you know, right now there are 10 Italian units here. They're not supposed to be here. They're supposed to be up here. We'll see how that works. The British have headed over to get the Canadian contingent, Canadian Expeditionary Force, and bring it over to France. And should be able to do so. Built one more transport, so now they can haul 6 units at a time over. So things look really bleak for the Germans right now. This might be a fighting withdrawal for a little while. The Americans are now in the game, and so as people who like to have a conservation of movement and energy do, you just save your money, and at the beginning of the round 3, you just build 6 transports and 4 artillery, you save $8, and off you go. You're going to be landing 12 units next turn, so good times. In Africa, the Germans took it on the chin again. Got attacked in the Belgian Congo by the French. I think they got a couple hits back on the French, maybe one, but they lost everybody in the first round of combat. The British have just reinforced, and this guy, Fritz here, ain't too long for this world. So this is intriguing, though. The Ottomans now have a little bit of a free hand. They don't have to worry about here. They have a concern here, but maybe Austria-Hungary should take care of these Italians and then regroup and smash the Italians coming in from the north, which will allow the Ottoman to focus essentially on one front. So we'll see. There could be some hope for the Central Powers yet, but it's looking pretty bad, even after 3 rounds. We'll see what we come up with for them, though. We'll see if we can strategize our way out of this mess. Thanks a lot, Austria-Hungary. Better do better on turn 4. Turn 4 is in the books, and people can build tanks now, and few people did, but a couple of people did. Alright, here we go. Down in the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire is healthy. They have been able to secure all of their land, plus a little bit here in Arabia and Bulgaria, and they're also a constant threat up here for the Russians, tying down Russian troops that would rather be elsewhere. The British built 5 tanks here in India, hoping for a big push. But remember, they absorb a hit, but only on the attack. We've played with where they absorb them on the defense as well, which kind of balances a little bit, but we're going to do out of box on this one, and so they'll want to be careful that they don't get caught as a defensive unit. They want to be an offensive unit absorbing those hits. Russia had to bring everybody back, and as a result has lost a lot of territory here. And beginning turn 4, at the end of the Russian turn, they have to look and see if the Russian Revolution can happen. And that means that 3 territories adjacent to Moscow are enemy controlled, another territory is enemy controlled, and Moscow is either contested or free from anybody else. So if this were the end of the Russian turn, it isn't of course, the Russian Revolution would happen. But it is not, so they'll obviously go take Belarus and possibly Ukraine just to give themselves some breathing room. But yeah, Germany's putting the pressure on here, sending things east, but they're also sending things west, because here are the Brits and the French. So we can see the whole holding in the east while you go, or holding in the west while you go to attack the east doesn't really work out when when your ally kind of drops the ball. If Austria-Hungary had remained a relevant force over here, the Germans could have possibly pulled this off. But it's looking not too good right now. But they have a lot of stuff. But we'll see what happens here as we move forward. Canadians have landed here and are looking pretty good. And what else is going on? Italy snagged Trieste because it was empty, because the Austro-Hungarians came down and took Serbia, so the Italians landed some more troops in Albania. The whole method of this, actually, the madness to this method is they just want to get rid of these Italian troops. And Italy, though, is making decent scratch for Italy. This last turn they made 20. So they're they're able to plant 6 units in Rome each time. So they're looking pretty good, but we'll see if that continues moving forward, because the Ottomans here are able to now focus almost entirely on Britain. So that could spell doom for the British. Not much stuff left in Africa for offensive pushes, but we'll see what happens with that. The Americans have landed in Africa, and they have 12 units ready to go, and 4 more coming each round. And that's pretty much it. The die rolling has not gone well for the Central Powers either. They have really taken it on the chin here, especially in battles where they really need to get some hits. They might get 10 hits, but they'll get hit 15 or 20 times, and hard to come back from numbers like that. We'll see what they can do, though, here on round 5. Wish them luck. And of course, as I said it, I realized, whoops, so I just made the change. The British, of course, can only have the 4 tanks and 1 infantry, because you can't leave any ground units or even aircraft without infantry on the board. So yeah, I fixed that. There you go. That would be my cat, Benson. You gonna say hi to the crowd? Yeah, pretty much like all cats. Aw, poor thing. Life is so terribly rough, isn't it? Isn't it right, life terrible? You poor thing. Alright, well, enough of the cat. On to round 6 we go, and I'll tell you what happened in round 5. As you know, I cleaned up that mess. Rookie mistake, and it's funny how often that happens when tanks come out. You just want to build tanks. So the British decided to go up and get rid of the Ottomans in Sevastopol, which they did quite handily, and lost nothing doing it. And so the Ottomans still have far more troops here than the British have, so we'll see what they wanted to do. We were going to have the Ottomans come out into the Persian territory here, but there's a good chance that all these tanks would come through and smashy smash and bring these guys, and that would be it. So I figured that it's better to just stay put for now, and they held on to this territory here. Everything's going pretty well for them in that regard. Everybody has moved north, so Africa is pretty much empty except for this and some newly arrived Yanks. Finally, the dice really smiled on the Austro-Hungarians. They killed all 6 in Albania for the loss of 2 infantry, so fairly fortuitous. They defeated the Trieste infantry without loss. Tyrolia, though, is now under Italian control. Not for long, but just wanting to divide up the AH forces. Heading back east, we see that Moscow is fairly well protected here, but the Germans have surrounded it again. Russians had taken Belarus, of course, but to avoid the Russian Revolution rule. But now the Russian Revolution rule will be in effect unless the Russians defeat one of these armies, actually 2 of these armies, or take Ukraine, I guess. Actually, they got to do quite a bit of work. As Germany, that's what I decided to do, was to spread these things out here. Yes, cat? What's the problem? And so put a lot more pressure. So the Russian Revolution, I mean, it likely won't happen, but the Russians will be way out of position by going after all this stuff, which is what this big fat stack of Germans wants to have happen. There's about 20 units there just chomping at the bit. Over here, the French and the English continue to creep forward. They took the Ruhr with some power, but the Germans now have marshaled enough forces that they outnumber this, so there's a good chance they'll be able to push back, capture the Ruhr this turn, and salvage something of this disaster on the Western Front. The Americans landed up in Piedmont and they have options. They can move into Venice should AH attack this round, which they likely will, but we'll see. They can also come down and force a landing in Albania, probably not, or they could come down to Smyrna. And they could actually attack Constantinople. That's a definite possibility, which would cause all six kinds of grief to the Turks. But of course, they've got to survive the minefields and the two Turkish cruisers. So maybe the Russians will help them out and do a spoiling attack on the Russians there. Let's see here. The French have built some tanks as well the past couple turns. The British just kind of loading things up. Went back for their 4 more Canadians to bring them back. And that's pretty much it. The Americans have some pretty meager reinforcements coming now. That's just the way the math goes. But they could do some interesting things here on turn 6. And we'll see what happens if the Moscow group can get out here and take care of business. Turn 7 is about to begin, and we're going to wrap things here in the east first. The Russians charged out of Moscow into Livonia to attack, and they lost their plane and lost the battle and the counterattack. Huge. They lost all their units that they had sent out. Now, they didn't send everything out, of course, but they sent out enough to hopefully put a bigger dent into the Germans. They did get 10 hits on their dice, I believe it was, but the Germans just had another 6 in Karelia and another 7 or 8 in Poland, plus some artillery, and just couldn't withstand the counterattack. So the Germans were able to come and take Ukraine as well. The Russians freed Tatarstan, and Sevastopol was freed by the British last round, and when they left this round, the Turks decided to come in. A little bit of power there, about 4 guys. And they also had some success here on the Persian front. They were able to come in and take without losing anybody. The 2 points for Persia. Now you can see that the British have got a ton of things ready to go here. But again, if they launch the attack, the attack coming back at them is going to be devastating versus these tanks, because they don't defend well at all. Now, of course, if these guys don't roll well and they still have 8 or 9 tanks left over, the next turn you get a bunch of freebies. So it's kind of the way it goes. Over here, static across the Suez. Everybody just kind of looking at each other, big frowns on their faces. The cheeky Italians, as they are wont to do, moved over to Smyrna without any sort of a struggle. We got French transports here ready to move these guys should the opportunity arise. The Turks stayed. They left their 7 men from the last build and added 7 more because this big British stack is coming over, and there's not a lot here to defend in all directions, so they're going to have to stay close to home for now. The Russians did try an attack here on Season 20, but they lost 1 to the mines, and then they lost 1 in the head-to-head combat. So they're out of boats down here. Up here, Austria-Hungary had some marginal success moving into Venice, and they did okay. They were able to also get Tyrolia back. But the Italians held fast, and they have reinforcements on the way, as well as the Americans have moved in now. So there's another 12 units in there for the Austro-Hungarians to deal with. And Italy does have the air power as it stands. So Austria-Hungary will likely be building a fighter this round. Those really can turn the tide of battle, folks, especially if there's big stacks of artillery like we have in some of our territories here. On the Eastern Front, the cheeky French squeaked through, just, because they can. Took Munich. But the Germans had some great success here in Ruhr. They weren't able to dislodge the Allies, but they did destroy all the Brits that were there, and some of the French artillery. They kind of took some of their own damages, but they were able to inflict more casualties than they received. And because of that, the British, who had kind of a scant force here, didn't feel like coming in and trying to take on the Germans. This guy's in Ruhr, by the way. Because the Germans do have the fighter there, and all that artillery, I think all but one of them got a hit. And so Britain, instead of wanting to throw all their guys away, decided to build up a much larger force. Oddly enough, not buying a fighter, though, mainly because I forgot. Some more Canadians have made it over. There's just one lone Newfoundlander. We're going to let him stay there, though, because if you know anything about the Newfoundland Regiment, it's a very sad story. Very, very tragic story. That's what happens when you let the World War I British officers lead colonial troops. Absolute disaster. You can look it up. The Newfoundland Regiment, World War I. And you will not believe the percentage of casualties they suffered in one day. Well, one morning. It's pretty nasty. That's pretty much all we have to say about that. I feel like Forrest Gump. Transport for the Americans on its way back. And, well, its way. There's 6 of them there. On their way back. So the Americans are committed to helping out Italy here. And we'll see what happens on turn 7. Italians won't be long here, but that just does bleed away resources. So we'll see what can happen on turn 7 here. Will Russia fall? Will the Russian Revolution happen? Or will they be able to stave off destruction? 7 is done, and we're on to round 8, and things are looking pretty bleak for Russia. We'll talk a little bit about some strategy that was employed by the Central Powers here, and then we'll head on to talk about some other things. So here, when the Germans attacked Moscow, the Russians had already taken back Belarus and Karelia in order to avoid having the Russian Revolution happen. So the Germans could, of course, taken that and still been a force in there and forced the Russian Revolution next round. But they decided not to, and I'll tell you why. Because if you do the Russian Revolution, all of a sudden Moscow, this Karelia, Belarus, Tatarstan, and Kazakhstan are now off the board as far as possible money goes for the Central Powers to collect. And so that's what happened is I decided to leave it in such a way that we can capture Moscow and then go capture the rest of this stuff. We'll find out if it was a good idea or not, because these things here are now here for an extra turn, whereas last round, or like this round, it would be highly likely that the Russian Revolution would happen and then these guys could get a head start heading back. But they'll be here one more round. But I think that's what we're going to go for, because cash is good right now and Germany's a little bit hurting for that. Usually by round 7, 8, 9 they are up in the 40s and doing pretty well, but they've been mired in the 30s and can't seem to break free of that. But that's what you get when you send everything into Russia. Oh, a little loud on the tunage. Alright, so here in the Middle East, Ottoman Empire has evacuated Persia and put everything into Mesopotamia. They could not dislodge the pesky Italians. They tried. They sent 7 infantry and got no hits. And the Italians got no hits either, so Smyrna remains off the economic chart. Kept all these things in here because there's decent little force here in defense. Not so much in attack, but in defense they're pretty good. And yeah, this is how we're looking right now. The British decided to build some fodder for the tanks. So when they do move forward, when the inevitable attack comes, at least they'll be giving up infantry for the first 6 hits or so before they have to start losing tanks. The British had a big stack here. I don't know if you remember. They had a big stack here. And so they came and took Serbia. They came and took Bulgaria, they took Galicia, and they came into Budapest and had a dreadful time of it. The Austro-Hungarians just hammered them, and you can see there's not much left here. They took out, I forget how much stuff was there, like there was like 5 tanks and 5 men or something, so yeah, it was not good. On the Italian front, the Americans just liberated Venice, and the Austro-Hungarians were able to get Tyrolia back. The Germans took back Munich and will take back Alsace, and will likely take the Ruhr. Some good rolling by both sides. You can see the Germans are now out of infantry, really. They just got the one guy left. So this stack of 8 infantry, which I built in anticipation of this very situation, looks like it'll come in handy now. And of course, there's more stuff. And this is all going west now. So Britain and France better get on their horses pretty quickly. And the Americans landed a couple more guys here. And they've got a couple more guys here. They got 4 units there. And lots of transports, but not a lot to transport right now. Not much went up here, just the British kind of brought some more forces over. They did try an attack here, and they did knock down the Germans a bit, but not to the point where Germany had to start losing artillery yet. So, very close though. That's pretty much it for the round 7 wrap up. This is the interesting part. Germany will likely take Moscow this round, but it's not for certain. And we'll see how the Russians will react on their turn. What will they build? I think honestly one of the best builds they could do is a fighter, and very simply, because then these what do we got here? 4, 7, 10 German artillery will be rolling 3s instead of 4s if the Russian fighter can win that battle, and that could be the difference. All right, we'll let you know how it goes in just a moment. Turn 8 has seen some interesting times, folks, and as you can see, Moscow has fallen. I did buy a fighter for the Russians, hoping to mitigate some of the damage, and rolled a 6 with the Russian fighter and a 1 with the German fighter, so it just wasn't meant to be. And so, yeah, the Germans wiped them out and only sustained, I think, 2 hits in reply. But now, because the Russian Revolution didn't happen, it was just taking the capital, the 2, 4, 6, 8 points that are still on the Russian board here are now up for grabs for the first people to get in, which will likely be Germany and the Ottomans. Sorry, had a little glitch there. Alright, so down here in the Middle East, the British built some more men, but they did send 4 over to Arabia. It was empty, and they just captured it. And the Turks said, no, you're not. And they took it back with force and didn't lose anything doing it. So the Turks are still pretty strong here, and they collected quite a bit. They collected 26 bucks this last round, because they're up 1, plus 3, 3, and 3, and these are in no real danger of being taken away from them. So the Ottomans could become quite an annoyance, especially to the British here in the Middle East, and also possibly to Africa, but this is a bigger concern. Looking up here, the Ottomans also moved across into Serbia to help out, knowing that the Italians were likely going to land, so the Italians did land in empty Albania, walked into empty Trieste and Tyrolia. So they were able to take all that stuff, and Italy is also collected 10 more than their normal fare, so they got 24. So that's going to offset a little bit what the Ottomans got, but not terribly much. As bad as Austria-Hungary has been doing, they have been able to gird up their loins, and they're ready to get back into the war. No natural enemies in the east anymore, so everything they got can go west. And that could spell trouble, but we'll see how the Allies handle it. The Americans continue to send over a trickle of guys, 4 or 6 units each round. And I debated whether or not to go in and support the Italians here with the American troops, because I do have like 16, 17 American units there. But then I thought, shoot, once they're in there, and they could get pummeled not only by the Austro-Hungarians, but the Germans could come south. And I want to build up just a unassailable force here, so that when they do decide to start pushing, they're just not going to get wiped out in a turn or two, and then all you got is a trickle left. So, and if you've ever played A&A with me, that's kind of how I like to do. I like little spoiling attacks here and there, but especially with America in all of these games, whether it's this one or any of the World War II versions, building up a big American fleet or a big American landing force and sending it in somewhere, and then, yay, you captured it, but your follow-up is a trickle. That's just a huge target for me anyway. You go wipe that out and you don't have any worries for a while. So I didn't want to fall into that trap again. But we'll see what happens here. At least Italy is going to be collecting all of her money for a while, and that was the point of bringing the Americans in, to keep Italy as a viable nation, which they have done. On the Western Front, the French slammed into the Germans and did a tidy bit of damage, and then the British joined them, and it was not much of a battle there. British landed some more troops. We brought over the Newfoundland Regiment, but we're gonna try to take care of them. If you haven't looked it up yet, look it up. British planted 8 more units plus a fighter there. The French and the German fighters each rolled a 1. They shot each other down, so there is no advantage for this artillery, although the Germans are the ones that have most of the artillery, and the Brits only have 3 and the French only have 2, as the French have begun to pour money into their big old tank production. The French came in here to try to dislodge the Germans from Alsace, but everybody missed. And that's pretty much it. Down here, status quo, not much going on. Although with the Turks having committed some guys down here, they may bring some more of it to Transjordan and put some pressure on. And the Americans, here's the trickle, so 6 men. And these boats are going back, and they're ready to, this load here is ready to go for next round. Alright, round 9 is going to be starting shortly. We'll see if anything happens. There's a few hot spots that are ready to explode. Round 10. Not a lot of fighting in this one. Germany, of course, scooping up some free territory. They got Belarus and Karelia and Tatarstan, and are bringing this big group south, hoping to put some pressure on the English. Now, the English did move out a little bit, but only brought out a bunch of infantry and left the remainder behind. So we'll see what happens as it goes on here. But the Turks had to bring everybody out of Arabia, and they had some men and artillery in Ankara. So although they didn't hit last turn, they may hit this turn, and should be able to survive a British counterattack, but won't inflict much damage. So this is the chess game we got going on right now. On this side here, the Turks brought reinforcements down to Transjordan. So Egypt now, it's getting closer to being under some pressures. They also sent their tank and their units from last round south. So they might be looking to push into Africa, which would be bad news for the Brits, of course. Albania was taken by the Austro-Hungarians with a loss of nothing. They took Trieste, lost 1 man. Tyrolia lost nothing, and moved their guys from Galicia over to Bohemia to help out. And again, the Italians and Americans stood fast, but there's 6 more Americans there and 4 more Italians coming up. So again, this is turning into very typical World War I stuff. The Italians thought they'd try a bit of a, not so much a Hail Mary, it's not an impossible task here, but they thought they'd come in here and hopefully get rid of some of the Austrian fleet, but failed to do so. And I was going to follow up with the American fleet, but I thought, boy, if I lose that and the Austro-Hungarians win this, then all we got out here are a whole bunch of transports, really. One British cruiser, so that would be a disaster. So we're gonna stay closer to home. On the Western Front, the French were able to punch through to Munich there easily, just the lone infantry, and but the French retreated from the Ruhr because all they had left was basically just a couple of units, and the Brits had nothing. So the French decided, instead of trying to punch through with a few tanks and like 6 or 7 men through this monster of a German army, they decided to retreat, and the Germans certainly could take a poke at that next round, but I think that would spell disaster for them, so they might have to just get things going as well before they try to assail that. Steady stream of Americans still coming over. Still some more stuff over here ready to join the struggle here in Europe. The isolationists are no more. Alright, that is round 10. Things are looking a little better for the Central Powers. Not really on the Western Front, of course. This really isn't looking much better for them. But maybe once the Austro-Hungarians can get things rolling, they might have a better shot at it. But things are looking a lot better for the Ottomans. And with a little bit of German help here, not a ton, but a little bit of help, about 12, 13 units there, including a plane, could come down and cause the British some grief. So we'll see what happens on turn 10. Should be exciting. Oh boy, I tell ya. Sometimes when you're just playing on your own, you just kind of get sucked into rules.
No, not yet. Not until me and Harvey get the rules straightened out.
Rules? In a knife fight? No rules.
Or something, or habits, and you just mess up. I messed up, so I actually went back and redid this battle. I kept going, and eventually the Italians actually won. So Austria-Hungary no longer has a navy, and we did this right at the end of the Austro-Hungarian turn, because I went to repair the ship, and I went, wait a second, they're not supposed to be sharing a sea zone. So that's what happens when you keep doing one battle in all these zones, is you bring it to the sea. But as you know, sea battles go. So anyway, long story short, too late, they're done. Alright, heading into turn 11, and as you can see, Finland is now under German command, as is pretty much all of Russia, except for Romania and Sevastopol, scooped up earlier by the Ottomans. The Germans moved down here into Kazakhstan, and so the British have decided to try something. We'll see if it works out. They took Afghanistan with authority. Now India is under an awful lot of pressure right now, because you got this monster stack here, a smaller, but not a huge stack. So I think might be time. I did this in order to give myself options. Staying in India, it was pretty obvious the Ottoman were going to be coming in. So coming up to here, at least I have some options. But India may be under some problems here. Might be under some duress. So we'll see what happens here. See if the dice are kind to the Brits. If not, some powers could have a much easier time. Over here, the Ottomans came across and killed 6 of the 8 troops, but as you can see, they have had reinforcements. The Americans have decided to put some time, money, and energy into Egypt and try to block the Ottoman expansion into Africa. Looks like they're going to be successful for a few turns here. That's quite a bit of stuff. They brought over 12 units, the Italians and the Americans, so it's now they outnumber them almost 2 to 1. So we'll see what people want to do though in the next rounds, but this obviously, you know, there's a steady stream of the Ottomans coming down here, and they don't have any natural enemies on this side at this time. Now they got to continue to build artillery, because if they don't, then the Allies could force a landing unopposed somewhere, and that might spell some problems there. This is going to be the big one for the Ottomans. The British could likely come and do quite a bit of damage to the Germans and would sustain probably no losses whatsoever. But I think this is a bigger concern right now. And the Germans, though, could likely move into Persia before. It'll be interesting. Over here, as we just noted, I screwed my head on straight and finally finished off that sea battle. And, oh, and I guess on the Italian move, they're able to move out of there, which they would, obviously, move out. So they'll do that, so they can repair at the start of next round. Keep that guy flipped. Up here, the Americans are going to be missing those extra reinforcements, I think, but the Italians put in 4 more, so that'll be a tough slug for the Austro-Hungarians unless they win the air battle, and they're up 2-1 right now, 2 planes to 1, so probably a good chance there. Germans were able to take back Munich. The Austro-Hungarians tried and failed. They got no hits, but neither did the French. But the Germans were able to get back all their territory. But then they did a tactical withdrawal. They moved back into Kiel and brought up their stuff from Berlin into Kiel. And so the French moved into the Ruhr and the British came in. Now it's almost starting to look like a little bit of a trap a la... what was that? What was Alexander's big battle where he let everybody in? I forget what that was now. I know they did it with Hannibal and against the Romans. He did Cannae, so we'll call this kind of like Cannae, where you let in the guys in the middle and then you surround them and pounce on them. We'll see how that goes. Still a modest number of Brits coming over each time because we're spending most of our money down in India for obvious reasons. The French decided to really bulk up on infantry this turn because if the Germans punch through, they're going to need as many units in the way as possible. And of course the Americans coming over, they'll be bringing over 8 guys next round. Alright, so that's it for round 10. Round 11, this is the big one. And this here may be the big one. And this could be a kind of one. I guess we'll find out in just a moment. Well, a dozen turns in, and some interesting things have been happening, not the least of which is we have Americans in Romania. What's up with that? We'll talk about that in a second. Well, the big battle down here was a big battle, but it really was a bit of a bust for the Ottoman. They did kill a bunch of British stuff, no doubt, but they got really hit hard because, of course, there were 11 or 12 artillery here, and there is a fighter because they won the battle, the British did. So on these 4s here, all but one of the 4s hit, and a few of the men hit, and actually a few of the tanks hit, defending at 1, believe it or not. So on the British turn here, they're going to have a possible chance to inflict some more damage. Unfortunately, the Germans are here, and they might come on in. Now, the British, being cheeky, snuck in behind here and took the Turkish zone of Mesopotamia for $3, knowing that they were going to be losing this 4 probably for the next 3 or 4 rounds, if not for the whole game. So somebody's got to deal with that, and the Turks also lost that, so they're actually down $6 right now, and it's not easy for them to get out there and get more money, especially when this is happening. Yes, they did an attack and they killed all the British and all the Italian troops, but the Americans were able to land some reinforcements and now have enough stuff to definitely stop this cold for a couple of rounds, and they've got 8 more units coming. So the Ottomans need to deal with this toot sweet or retreat and gather up a stronger force and then come south again. The Italians actually tried a bit of a foolhardy thing. They tried an attack on Constantinople, so they came in and everybody was safe. They killed the cruiser. Cruiser didn't hit back. The mines didn't hit anything. They landed. The artillery, boom, hit one of them. And then the Italians rolled and they only got 1 hit. And the Ottomans then got a whole bunch, enough to kill the rest of the 3 Italians. So a very small dent, but also reminded the Turks that they are not invincible. So we'll see how that goes. Unfortunately, the cost to saving Africa means that Italy may not do so well here in a moment. The Austro-Hungarians have got quite a contingent together here to come on in. Not enough to win in one round, but the Ottomans can come and help as well once that gets going. Now, of course, Austro-Hungary has no more navy left, so anybody can start doing landings in Trieste and Albania and whatnot. So they do have to be careful about that. Last thing they want is this kind of stuff happening all over the place. That's pretty much it for there. On the Western Front, the Germans did an attack, and they suffered a few casualties, to be sure, but the French afterwards decided to pull back, and although they did come up and take Alsace and they liberated Lorraine, they went back into Belgium and joined up with some guys, and they've got another 13 men and an artillery coming next round. So the Germans may have to hit this now and not allow those French troops to be on the defensive. So might force them into that. They do have 2 planes versus the French single fighter. The French built another one though, hoping to get in there in time, but the Germans are kind of on the march here, and I'm having trouble as the French and the British stopping them, but there's quite a number of guys here. There's about 35 units, and the Germans have about 30 or so. But when you get those artillery rolling at 4, that can really be a huge difference. I think that's pretty much it. The Americans are coming over. They're small build this time, very modest build, only $13, and that trickle is about to commence. But next round they've got 4 transports. They don't need to spend any money on transports for the foreseeable future, so that should help. All right. Well, we'll see what turn 12 brings. Will there be any sort of resolution here, or will the struggle continue? We'll let you know right away. We are now on to 3 dice. Look at that. And not a lot has happened here, although America continues to do its little thing here, capturing another $9, which really helps them out because $20 just a horrible number in this game. It's horrible. When you have to buy boats, that is. So the British sent a guy up to Tartarstan to collect that, knowing that they were likely to lose India. However, they did not lose India, not yet anyway. But they have taken quite a dirty beating down here. So this will probably be their last big attack. Probably won't lose much. But they've defended well too. They on their turn they actually built 5 infantry. On their turn, actually, they wiped out the Germans, but they and got into quite a few of the Ottoman here. But when they were defending against the Ottoman, the tanks, they got 4 or 5 out of 11 defense dice at 1. Yeah, unreal. So that kind of shocked the Ottoman. The British came and took Persia, of course. Thought about going to Ankara, but you're just going to get wiped out. So this way, they got to come and get you. So Mesopotamia and Persia are going to be pretty safe. But the Ottoman continued to send things down towards Africa because the Americans, as we know, have got quite a bunch of stuff here. But this time there were 9 artillery waiting for them, and that would hurt to drop off there. So instead, they dropped their stuff up north, where the Italians had already left Venice. So the Americans did a tactical withdrawal as well, and we'll see what happens because the Ottomans sent their 7 infantry up there to help the Austro-Hungarians. So the road to Rome is not open, but it's a little less blocked than it was a moment ago. But the cheeky Italians came and took Trieste, because why not? Always worried about getting a 1 on those mines, but they were able to sneak through and got a little hard currency for their battling. Oh, got a Frenchman, a little too much red wine there. All right. The Germans continue their inexorable march. Little tip of the cap to Brian Wasson there. Some big, heavy hitting battles going on in here, and no one can seem to really get much of an advantage. Not sure whose hand that plays into more, but at this point, I think the Germans, because they got a pretty amazing economy, although they're starting to lose that amazing economy. They lost 4 this last round, and there might be more to come, so we'll have to see how that goes. The French are building more and more and more infantry, just hoping to dish out as many casualties as they can. Germans are pretty light on infantry, so they only have 6 coming each round, and even though they have 5 tanks, they tend to take at least another 5 or 6 hits. So they're starting to lose some stuff. They took 11 hits in the last battle, so 5 of them went off the tanks, no problem, but then they had to lose 5 or 6 artillery in the last battle. So that kind of attrition might slow them down to a bit of a crawl. A goodly number of tanks coming behind them, though, which may help out. And the French, I thought, let's just put a little bit more than 1 infantry in here in Alsace. We'll see if this works out or not. Not entirely sure if that was a good idea, but it might draw a few more forces away to deal with them. Or the Germans might say, have your 3. But we'll see here. Austria-Hungary could lend a hand, I guess. They've got quite a number of troops at the ready. That's pretty much it. The Americans, tiny trickle this turn. But next round, we've built a plane here for the Americans, so that should be helping out, and could help the Americans. They do have some artillery over here in Europe, but no bonus for them, unless they're on the defense, and Italy perhaps buys a fighter one of these days, but they really can't afford to. So, all right, so round 13 is about to happen here, and if India can hold on, Ottomans might be in trouble. But if the Ottomans take India, I don't know. This looking like the Central Powers might actually scoop up a victory here. All right, we'll see what happens on round 13. All right, round 11 is in the books, and seems like the clock is kind of ticking on the Central Powers here as the Allies bring all their money to bear. Fun little event here in Moscow. The British walked in and they fought and nobody got a hit. So now Moscow's contested. So there goes $6 off the Germans. Plus the American who survived came up here and took Poland, and there's nothing within 1 space of Poland. So he's going to be all right for a few rounds. Probably go up north, scoop some money for the US of A, eh? Down here in the south, big battle, lots of casualties both ways, but the British have held on. Now the British are lucky because they get to build first. So they built 4 artillery and 1 fighter, and then their 1 man and 11 tanks smashed into the Ottomans and caused quite a bit of damage, actually. I think 7 or 8 hits. When the Ottomans replied, they got 6 hits, I believe, and that was pretty good. And when it came time for the Ottoman to attack, it's kind of that you got to do it because you don't want them to have a bunch of tanks shooting at you next round. So they attacked. They did not do well, and the British were able to take a few more Ottoman off the board. Thanks specifically to the fighter and the 4 artillery now shooting at a 4. So as a result, the Ottoman have had to divert some much needed resources away from Africa. But Africa, Egypt anyway, is now under their control as the Americans have redeployed south of them. Now the one Achilles heel for this Ottoman army here is that it can only go in one direction. So, because there's only 1 infantry, in case you're wondering why. So, it's likely they're going to head south, but that'll leave a lot of this exposed. So, and I've seen this before, where the Ottoman to take off and they start gobbling up African territory. But I mean, when you add up the troops here, you've got 18, 21 plus like another 40. So you got over 60 points in troops here. If you take all of Africa and hold it for 4 rounds, you might make up that 60, but I doubt it. And they're not going to take all of it, so it's kind of a trade-off, right? We'll see what we decide once this happens. I think a big having a big impact on that decision will be what's happening with India. Is it still a possibility? But I think they might be a turn too late. I think it's kind of deceiving here. It looked as though Ottomans could handle it, and then it just fell apart. Some poor dice. I mean, not horrible. Not horrible. I mean, they've been hammering down, and they took away 6 tanks last round, and before that they took away a bunch of men and artillery and whatnot. So they've done all right, but still hurting a little bit. Austria-Hungary was able to get rid of the American in Budapest and the Italian in Trieste and have punched down here. The Americans were forced to come and attack them, but they did all right. They kind of took a little bit of a beating themselves, but they did all right. They had a good accounting. But the best thing is that for Italy anyway is that Austria-Hungary is now stalled, and it cannot carry on until it gets rid of these Americans, and there is a bunch more on the way, including a plane. So Austria-Hungary may have to reload everything up here and come down in a big pile again. On the Western Front, another tactical withdrawal by the French. It's the last one they can really do, because after that they're on the battle map, and that's when the real pain happens, because you can lose a lot of units on the trench battle map. So the French built a bunch of men. The Germans don't really have enough to attack this without suffering a ton of casualties, so they're going to have to bring up some troops. You can see, though, they got 6 tanks there. So they may actually, that might even be a withdrawal as well, and then punch forward with the tanks. We'll see. But a decent amount of supplies coming in behind here. So there's a steady stream heading this way, although now that we got this Yankee Doodle Dandy here running around, might have to do something about that, because that can cause them a lot of problems. That's pretty much it for the wrap-up. The Americans bringing over 6 more units soon, including 3 tanks. Starting to build some of the more high-priced units, fighters and tanks and whatnot. We'll see if that helps here on round 14. It's getting pretty serious. Round 15. Time marches on, and so does the American, as he goes up and liberates Livonia, or captures Livonia, or does something to Livonia. The Battle of Moscow remains a tense affair, with nobody having the upper hand, so nobody wants to roll a die and give up $6 to somebody. The British came up into Sevastopol because they could. Because India is free. And, yeah, convincingly, they didn't take any damage. They took out the final 6 or 7 Ottoman troops this round. And building that plane and some artillery was the key, because I rolled a lot of 4s with them, which would not be hits without the plane. So the Turks are having to send some stuff over, and we'll see what their answer is like. They were able to dispatch the Americans in Africa, and now Africa is open, which means I might have to move my dice rolling tray. And in the Med, pretty much status quo. Let's see here. Austria-Hungary took back Romania and will likely take back most of these as time goes on. The Germans sent a couple guys over as well, just to silence that noise. This was an interesting round in Italy. So Austria-Hungary came in and attacked and had some success in Tuscany, and they were able to punch down the numbers of Italians down to pretty much nothing, and the Americans were also pretty much hooped. There wasn't too much left there, but then because the Italians had built in Rome before. They had 8 guys in Rome, and they just charged out and were able to extinguish the flame of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which still burns pretty brightly, mind you. They still got a lot of stuff coming over, but that bought Rome time, and I think Italy will be fine for the foreseeable future. On the Western Front, the Germans popped down into Lorraine with 1 infantry, and the French crushed him with half their army. Belgium was vacated by the Germans in order to regroup before another push forward. So you can see how going into Belgium would have been death, because it's bordered by Alsace and the Ruhr. But Alsace is only bordered on Lorraine here, so they're a little safer in here. And the British just landed some more people up in Picardy. Another neat thing happened here. The French came across with their 2 battleships and cruiser and punched the daylights out of the German fleet, but then the British had to come over and finish the job, which they did. The mines hit nobody in the entire both battles, so pretty ineffectual mine land there, Germany. The reason for this is very simple. We want to slow down the German march westward. And so we're going to be landing troops behind, and the Germans will have to expend resources in order to stop that or ignore it and try to get to Paris before all the wheels fall off. It was really looking good for the Central Powers, but now all of a sudden it's not looking quite as good. Ottoman are still okay. They got a decent force here that they're going to have to bring back. They can't mess around in Africa. There's just too much. There's just too much artillery here to be traipsing around Africa. So we might bring these guys over here so that we can bring guys up, and then we can send our lone infantry walking around Africa for a little while. But the Brits are pretty mobile here, so with the transports. But lots of options, lots of ideas, means it's a good game. The Americans, of course, I mentioned it already, landed with some force there in Italy to reinforce, and that was after Italy had expunged AH from their property, so there was no free shots or anything. And so the Americans have quite a bit of stuff here now, and they got more coming, including some tanks. But they do not have a build over here ready to come. They have these things going over. They got 6 transports headed back, but I didn't build any transports this round because I don't want to spend any more money on transports. Well, this round has seen some interesting developments, and we'll start up north here. As you know, the British came and the French and British came and took out the German fleet. No landing was attempted this round, but perhaps next round they can bring over 10 units. So Germany has to be cognizant of that and keep things back to play a little defense. But moving forward, their offense has been crushing it. They continue to sweep away everybody in front of them and are taking no hits because they have 12 tanks there to take the hits. Now when they get attacked, which actually they haven't really been attacked for a couple of rounds now, they've had a ton of men to absorb the hits and some artillery. But also they've typically had air superiority, so all their artillery, which they're down a bit now, they're numbering 14 now, roll at a 4. Well, if they roll at odds, that means they're going to be hitting about 9 or 10 times, and I mean that's a lot of injury, and that's to say nothing of all the other rolls they're doing. So the British and the French have had to make a stand here in Burgundy. That is all there is to it, while they hope the Americans are able to get off their butts and do something. Well, down in Italy, the Americans have come back with the Italians to Rome. Rome went and took Piedmont, but the Austro-Hungarian is just too powerful in this territory to attack it, plus they've got some decent reinforcements on the way. Over here, the Germans and Austro-Hungarians continue to gobble up what the Americans are leaving behind, but the Americans are kind of running out of real estate pretty fast here, so hope they've enjoyed it. Moscow continues, it's kind of like the dead of winter, nothing's going on there. Austria-Hungary has been able to scoop up quite a bit of cash here. I think on their last turn they picked up $44. because they had Piedmont and Venice, and then they had all this stuff around here, so they're doing all right. Down here in India, the British have moved out a little bit, and the Ottomans have moved out to challenge them, which may not have been a smart idea, but we'll see what we see here on the next round. Not a ton of firepower for the Brits, but enough to combat this anyway. Down in Africa, as I mentioned, I was going to send this guy off on his own. He's just going to go around and try to gobble up some points while Ottomans are still alive. Unfortunately, the Ottomans don't have a capital anymore. USA, USA. Let me tell you how this went down. Okay, so the Ottomans put their build in there, and they built 5 men and a couple of artillery, because that's all they could afford, and then sent everything off. And then I looked and I saw, I can bring 4 Italians and I can bring 8 Americans, provided they don't hit mines on their way in. What the heck? Let's give it a whirl. And that's kind of where we're at here, because if we didn't put a crimp into the Ottomans, they'll be here forever. So, the Italians came in first, and they only got 1 hit, and they suffered 3 losses. Well, what can you do? But then the Americans came in, and they brought their 4 transports. As you can see here, none hit mines. And in their assaults, you have to always have an infantry on a territory, right? But in a sea zone, you can have 2 artillery, you can have 2 planes, you don't need any men with them. Because on transports, it doesn't matter. You can bring any 2 units, any mix and match. You can bring 2 fighters, you can bring 2 artillery, 2 tanks. So I decided with the Americans I was going to load up for bear, and I brought 6 artillery, 1 fighter, and 1 man. So they all got through. When they landed, the Ottomans, the 2 artillery they had, one of them got a hit, so I had to remove one of my artillery, so I was down to 5. But then the 5 artillery are shooting at a 4. The plane strafed, he got a hit, and then all the artillery got hits. And yeah, that wiped out Constantinople. So the Americans ended up getting the Ottomans' cash, which was $20. Pretty much double what the Americans typically get. And the Ottomans cannot build anything this round. Now, they definitely have enough stuff here to take it back. Whether or not they do, though, I mean, they've got a roll. If they can take it back, great. If they can't, that's going to be a big problem. But this is also a big problem for them. There's a good chance they're going to lose most of this army here, or a good chunk of it, and probably not inflict a ton of damage. So we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. Maybe Austria-Hungary, who was going to be heading up here to do this kind of stuff, may actually lend some support to the Turks. Whew, round 13, Baker's dozen, lucky 13, whatever you want to call it. It was not good to the Allies up here, and it was not good to the Axis, the Central Powers, pardon me, down here. And it should be, instead of Axis and Allies, it should be Central Powers and Entente, but what can you say? Or Triple Alliance that has 4 different countries in it. Somebody couldn't add.
They're making it more complicated as far as I'm concerned.
All right, well, we'll see what round 14 brings. Will Constantinople still be in American hands? All right, round 17 just about to start. Strange things are afoot when the Americans are up in Finland. But there they are, being chased by the Germans, of course. The Kaiser's troops are heading up there. Austria-Hungary was able to secure Moscow on this turn, cost them an artillery, but there you have it. And they decided to stay here because the Brits only had 1 infantry and couldn't go north and west. And knowing that west was the only way they really could go, they did. Built a modest 2 infantry here in India this round, but did use their transports to capture Arabia. The Turks, moving further into Africa, decided to take the German because they knew the Germans would get the money, but they didn't know if they would, and they really would not. It was horrible. The Italians came over first. These mines aren't working. Nobody's getting hit with mines right now. So they came over, dropped 4 guys off. 1 guy died to artillery fire, and then the other 3 all got hits, and then the Ottomans, they got enough hits. They got 3 hits to kill all the Italians. But then the Americans landed, and with that fighter and the artillery and some tanks absorbing hits, they landed unscathed. And yeah, so Constantinople is definitely in Allied hands right now. Up here, Rome has been sacrificed almost in order to capture and hold Constantinople. We'll see if it's worth it in the grand scheme of things. Austria-Hungary has quite the force up here, and may decide to head to Paris instead. But they may not have to. The Germans came in and really shellacked the French in Burgundy, and the French retreated to Paris, but then they counterattacked and pushed the Germans back. One little thing that I've run into on the battle board is, on this board you'd always need to have an artillery, but on my battle board there's no real allowance for that. So what I've decided to do is that when you attack on the trench battle board, the battle map, as soon as you're out of infantry, whether you're offense or defense, you must retreat. So back to Paris the French went, and then when they came out and counterattacked, the Germans had to go back to Lorraine because they didn't have any men left. But you can see there's a German infantry. Where did he come from? Well, the other rule I have now implemented to the battle map is if you retreat with no infantry into a territory with no infantry, one of your units must get turned into an infantry. So you would convert an artillery or a tank into an infantry. And there it goes. Okay? So that's just a little rule. And this is playtest, right? So you come up with these little things. Another thing is the British did an amphib landing in Picardy where the Germans had some artillery, and I don't have an allowance for that on my trench battle map. So what I did was I just had the Germans do their 4 or 5 artillery shots, which were pretty devastating, and then put the surviving British troops on the battle map, and away you go. And this time the Germans did pretty well. They targeted and killed a couple of artillery and were able to kill a good number of British units, but then retreated because they knew they had a big stack here that they could come back and counter with, and then likely survive the British counterattack. Looking pretty bleak right now for the Allies, though. They've lost Moscow, and if they lose Paris, which they very well might in a couple of turns here, that is the game, of course. So Italy is not such a big deal if Italy falls, because they need to capture Paris. One of the capitals has to be Paris, and for the Allies, one capital has to be Berlin. So as fun as it is to take Constantinople, and it takes the Ottomans kind of out of the game, we got to get way north. And I think these guys can go west a couple spaces before we can traverse this whole area. Of course, built up for, you can bring 10 units on a landing into Berlin, but countering that, I decided to build 7 artillery. So you're going to get 7 free shots, and then you're going to have to put up with all that defense. So it's highly unlikely a landing in Berlin will yield any great results. The Americans do have 12 more units coming in that can come clobber this guy or retake Egypt or Albania or bulk up Rome, or maybe go to Marseille if the Austro-Hungarians come across. Lots of options. Could even go up north, land those 12 units up there, but we'll see. That might be too little too late. Germans might be fully entrenched there, and that kind of a landing would be suicidal. Alright, we'll let you know what goes on turn 17 right after this. Alright, turn 18, and I think this is probably going to be the last one. Looking pretty bleak for the Triple Entente right now. Right, Cat? He doesn't care. Yeah, you like eating the Ottomans. Nah, he's pleading not guilty. Alright, so yeah, the Austro-Hungarians have come back from the abyss. Remember when they were like fighting to breathe? Yeah, they have done quite a number here. They're even down here in Persia. Obviously not going to last long, but causing a little bit of grief to the Brits. And the Italians and Americans have reinforced here in Constantinople. And you know, the Turks continue to make a Turkish nuisance of themselves here. Yeah. So Austria-Hungary didn't take Tuscany. What? Well, that's because they're headed this way. They came here into Burgundy and put the boots to the French. And then the Germans could just come on in. And that's what happened. It was too powerful for the French to take, so the French and the English got booted out of here as well. And everybody got moved into Paris. The Americans dropped off here, Bordeaux, and hoping to help out, but it might be too little too late. There are a lot of troops here in Paris, but I think the writing's kind of on the wall at this point. Austro-Hungarians don't have much of a punch right now, but the Germans certainly do. Oof, lots and lots of stuff here. And not much else to say, folks. Just a steady stream of Krauts coming down here. And, you know, Americans have their own stuff going on here, and they're not doing too badly for themselves. But it's just, despite this, looking pretty bleak. But we'll find out. Is turn 18 the turn that Paris dies? We shall see after these messages.
Hi, Marty McDermott for the Martin Fine Furniture Store, the oldest furniture business in Indiana, and our prices are out of this world. 50% off everything, every day. A free chair with every sofa purchase. Free delivery, free setup, and 6 months free financing.
Mr. Martin, did all these Martians buy our furniture?
Yeah, and I hope they don't expect free delivery all the way to Mars.
You got that right.
Well, the Germans captured Paris, and in convincing fashion. This was all the stuff that was on Paris, and minus a couple of guys that died to strafing runs. And the Germans lost nothing because they had 9 tanks, and the French got 7 hits back. So the only thing that can happen now in this game to stop the Central Powers from winning is this American Expeditionary Force of 12 units. So we're just going to skip ahead and see how well they do, because after that, you know, they can land these guys as well, and the Brits could land some guys, but look at what the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans are bringing behind. They're just going to wreck everything. So it's unlikely that they can pull this off, but we're going to do it here in real time for you. I'm just going to kick the Ottoman out of the way here in Africa. You lost your capital, but you're probably going to win the game right now. Alright, so here we go. So we have the 6 Americans coming in, and they're all at 3. Okay. So we're just going to get 12. I said 6 Americans, but I meant 6 infantry and 6 artillery. So there's 12 at 3. Now the Germans do have 2 planes, so they get to strafe them first before the battle begins. Oh, no hits. Well, maybe that's a good omen. So here are the 12 shots from the Americans. Alright, well, I'm going to back up a little bit here. So 4s, 5s, and 6s are no good. Looks like they hit right on where they're supposed to. So 6 hits. So the Germans, of course, would remove 6 infantry from the board. So they have 6 infantry plus 4 infantry is 10. So that's going to be 10 at 3. So we'll just roll them quickly. So 10 at 3. Alright, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got 5 hits on the Americans, so we're going to lose that chip for the Americans. And then we have the tanks, and there's 9 tanks. So, and they're all at 1s, unfortunately, because they're just tanks that are just sitting there. Defending tanks kind of suck. And they got no hits with the tanks. Okay. But then we have 13. You can see it there. 13 artillery. So that's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Just make sure that's correct. That's correct. Okay, so we just need 7 more hits. And these are all with 4s because we have the air power. Okay, well, it's looking like that's it. Alright, they just needed 7 hits. And whoops, and they got 10. 10 out of 13. That's kind of how it's gone in some of these big battles. So the Americans would lose all their forces here, and the British would, or the Germans would retain control. And there's nobody else around that can alleviate the problems in Paris right now. So that's it. That is a Central Powers victory. My cat is very impressed with that. Right? Okay. And yeah, thanks for watching, folks. I am as surprised as you are, possibly. From the first 7-8 rounds, it really looked like the Central Powers was going to have a lot of trouble. But as soon as Russia fell, and Germany and Austria-Hungary could both focus westward, that was the big tide turning. And even with the British only being able to build 5 units down here, they were putting the squeeze on Constantinople, albeit with a lot of help from Italy and America. But you can see how when you get Italy, America, and Britain together, the Turks really don't have a hope. Now there's a chance they would do some damage here on this round coming in, but they wouldn't be able to kill everything. I highly doubt it. And in which case you got this stuff coming in behind. So they might capture it just in time for the British to take it again and take their money. So Constantinople, I think, was a lost cause, but the game was a victory for the Central Powers. So congratulations to the bad guys. And thanks for watching, folks. Really appreciate it. And we will see you next time here at the Hilltop Pillbox. Make sure you hug your loved ones. And really, you know, give them a good hug today. You know, and tell them you really love them. And tell your friends you're happy that they take time out of their busy schedules. A lot of people have kids, or they have other things they need to get done at home. And they just set time aside to play. And I really appreciate it. Playing solo, it's kind of fun to mess around and try different things. But for the most part, playing with other people is my choice. So anytime I can play with friends, I really thank them a lot. So you do the same, and we'll see you next time here at the Hilltop Pillbox. May the dice be with you.